To take this conversation further, we're joined by South African Union of Students spokesperson Asive Dlanjwa. Asive, appreciate your time this evening. Now, you've obviously listened to that clip. Well, I certainly hope you listened to the clip that we heard just now where the NSFAS spokesperson was speaking. Just give us your reaction before we delve into the numerous challenges that some of your members are facing.
Good evening, Hugo, to you, your viewers and your listeners, and thank you for having us. The reality is that since the commencement of the current payment system, there is not a single month that has gone by without a crisis, which brings us to the conclusion that the explanation given by the spokesperson of NSFAS and the department, Mr. Mnisi, is absolute rubbish. Sorry to use that word, but it is absolute nonsense, because prior to the payment system that is used now, these problems were not there, number one. Number two, it is not possible that the scheme has to verify its beneficiaries every month on a month-to-month basis. It is a ruse, it is a lie that is being peddled to cover up the incompetencies and what we now understand to be a sabotage that is happening within the scheme. Because you tell me, for instance, you can't tell me that SASSA is going to verify its beneficiaries every day, to the extent to which every time and every month the SASSA grant would be delayed because SASSA is saying we are verifying who is our beneficiary. It is absolute nonsense. It is not possible that NSFAS cannot know who their beneficiaries are from a month-to-month basis, because effectively what the spokesperson is saying is that they do not know who they are paying on a month-to-month basis. They have to check who do we supposed to pay this month, which is absolute nonsense. So that explanation is absolute rubbish. The reality is that the students have been suffering greatly since May up until now.
Now, we talk about teething problems with any system when it comes into effect. But the fact that there are 17 institutions that you represent that are impacted would seem to suggest that it is a little more than teething problems.
Absolutely. You know, the reality here is that it's not even 17 institutions, by the way, it's all institutions. Right now, you've got journalists. You can send each of your journalists or your journalists to each of the 26 institutions and find out. And you will find out that there is at least one, we know obviously it's thousands, sometimes even per institution, a student that has not received their allowances since May. As I am speaking to you right now, as per our calculations, there are probably over 80,000 students who went to write their final examinations or rather their end-year examinations without allowances, without food, without toiletries, without sanitary products, and you tell me that there is no crisis. It is not true. It is a ruse that is used to cover up a failing system. The issue of 17 institutions, no systems, this, no glitches, it does not exist. Two things are happening at NSFAS concurrently. Number one, it is the incompetency from everyone, including the acting CEO, who is failing to manage that ship. There is high incompetence, number one. Number two, we have gone on to suspect that there could be sabotage, because when, for instance, the explanation that we were given now is that no, there was a glitch, we sent the wrong file for payment and all of those things. You ask yourself, you have been paying students for years, and you tell me every month there's the same glitch where you send wrong files of who you do not know who you're paying, you're sending wrong lists, etc. Those things are not possible in a scheme. That is, the business of NSFAS is worth 50 billion rand. You cannot tell me that in a 50 billion rand institution, surely you are having such problems on a day-to-day basis.
Are you worried that these custodians, because they are custodians of these sums of money that are granted to students over a period that they're in school, would send the wrong files for payment? Now, the potential implications of sending the wrong files where a system is meant to be checked, rechecked and checked again because it's large sums of money. Does that concern you?
We are concerned about that because it speaks to, number one, as we have said, incompetency, And it undermines the basic mandate of the scheme to be able to carry out its responsibility to the poor and the working class. All these things ultimately, and this is the point that, for instance, I've stressed to this show and to the public for the longest of times, that what you must understand is that the beneficiaries of NSFAS are the most indigent, the poor and the working class. So when these things are happening, they are direct attack on the well-being, the livelihood and the futures of the poor and the working class, further undermining their ability to be able to pull themselves out of the clutches of poverty. So we are very concerned because it's more than systematic glitches, as we have said. It is a direct attack on the futures of the poor and the working class. So we are extremely concerned about the state of the scheme.
Asive, let's move away a little bit from NSFAS and focus on the people that you represent, some who are working class, as you suggest, the indigent and so on. Just what are they going through emotionally, mentally, at this particular point where many of them, from what we understand, are having to borrow money, for instance, to make their way home? And you've talked about thousands that wrote their exams without any of them having received their allowances for the entire year.
Their miseries are unfathomable, and the atrocities that they have had to endure because of this. Let me give a picture to the public, for instance. You've got someone who comes from a poor family where there is no money, where no one is working, or they are being raised by their grandmother or something, their 80-year-old grandmother. Some of them have not received their allowances since May. They have not been able to put food to eat whilst they're expected to study. These are thousands of students that I am speaking about. So this has made them vulnerable to all sorts of societal issues, from, for instance, prostitution. We have cases where some students, and I don't say this as an exception, for instance, there are many students whom we know of who have had to resort to prostitution, who have had to resort to a selling of things. Some of them, regrettably, not that we're condoning that, but they've even had to resort to crime to be able to sustain themselves while they are carrying out their academic obligations. That's a reality of thousands of students. Number two, you've got students that wrote examinations without food, without toiletries, without sanitary products, and they were expected to write their examinations. Thousands of students. That is the impact it has had on them. Right now, we are sitting with a further thousands of students that are waiting on those allowances that have been chased away from their residences. For instance, what the spokesperson is saying, that they have spoken to institutions to accommodate these students. It's between two things. Either the spokesperson is lying or the department has lost control of the sector, because the institutions that have not done that, that have chased the students away, and students have had to fend for themselves whilst waiting for those allowances, such that they might be able to buy their bus tickets and be able to go home. So these are just but three examples of the impact that the failure to pay students altogether or on time has had on the students.
Asive, how much of this is documented? I mean, you talk about thousands of students in multiple institutions. I think the 26 that we've numbered. Do you have detail of the individuals, of a some number of individuals by name, by ID number, for instance?
Yes, they are. Because, for instance, NSFAS says to you in their last, as per their current statistics, they say they have onboarded 99% of students to the new payment system, but 10% of those students still have not been able to access their funds. These are not my numbers. These are the numbers that have been released by NSFAS. When you look at the total number of students that are funded by NSFAS, you are looking at well over 80,000 students that have not received their funding. And it does not bother NSFAS, it does not bother them to say, someone applied to us, they were able to prove that they are poor and they cannot afford. We approved them for funding, and they are on our list and they qualify to be funded by the state. but we have withheld their money for 6 months. How are these people living? NSFAS is not asking themselves that question. They are saying, no, they are waiting for the students to come and do KYC and all of those things. So we do have numbers. Now, when you are looking at almost 100,000 students, obviously we would know some of the cases by name or personally based on the number of students that contact us directly for assistance, for instance. But I'm just giving you but one category of students that have been confirmed, not by us, but by NSFAS, that you are sitting with almost 80,000 students that have had to undergo the atrocities, the miseries, and the nightmare that I have just painted for you.
Asive, just allow me to read your objectives from your website to promote the development of an education system that provides equity of access, opportunity and outcomes, and positively responds to the needs of both students and economic, social, cultural and needs of our country, region and continent. So therein lies the objectives and to some degree the obligations that you have to your students. Now, one of the things that you mentioned is that for many, many months you've been speaking to various media about the challenges that NSFAS is posing for your students. So let's talk about the legal position that you, as SAUS, has taken. Have you taken any legal moves to deal with NSFAS and the challenges and failures that you suggest, or the failures that are evident in their obligations to these students?
We have not, for instance, if the legal route, for instance, would be to litigations, etc., or to approach the courts of law. We have not done that as yet, and maybe it is time that we explore that possibility. We have done a few things, for instance, to agitate in the public, for instance, even here in the media, that has to an extent been able to gain us some victories, though be it sometimes relative. We have agitated within institutions of higher learning, giving support to our SRCs that have led protests within the institutions. We have written and met multiple times, for instance, with the Department of Higher Education and NSFAS. The fortunate or unfortunate part is that over and above the steps that we take outside the boardrooms in terms of agitation and putting pressure, we still obviously have an obligation to meet with the stakeholders and be able to chart a way forward. For instance, I think 3 or 4 weeks back, if you look into our social medias, we would have published what were our recommendations and submissions to the funding guidelines for 2024, so that it informs how NSFAS must fund these students based on what we appreciate to be the realities and the experiences of the students. So, for instance, some of the things that we have had to do, like, for instance, to produce that document would be research and put together proposals that we put to the department. If you, for instance, you take the allowance currently weight at, we had to fight, we had to put proposals, and ultimately win the battle of getting the increase of 10%. So over and above some of the agitation measures we have taken, we also have the responsibility, which we have been trying to carry out, to carry on to engage with the department and all the necessary stakeholders to ensure that we can inform even the policy, legislation, and the guidelines by which the students are serviced by the state. But as far as the legal route is concerned, we have not done that, and I don't think we are opposed to that, and it is probably, maybe should be at that stage, because in the reality is that over and above some of the submissions that we have made, there are certain things that remain to be a hindrance and that are directly impacting on the constitutional right of our students.
I like the idea of you bringing the constitutional rights of your students, and one of those rights is the right to education, a right to shelter. Now, do you not feel that you are failing your students to a degree if you do not explore every avenue? I mean, for the last several months, you've talked about continually speaking, putting out various agendas, various communique that have not yielded results. And the biggest challenge for me is based on what you said just now, that there are some of the students that you represent that are being forced into crime, that are being forced into prostitution. So parents are watching this show at this very minute, right? And their hearts are bleeding their hearts are breaking because their children are being forced, as you say, into prostitution or into crime, and there is no protection. And I think you are that buffer. Is it not time for you? In fact, it may even be a little bit late for some of them because they've been exposed to these horrendous conditions where they're having to turn to crime and turn to prostitution in order to survive, when what they should be doing is learning and trying to build their lives.
What we're engaged in effectively, if you like, without being cliche, is a revolution. It is a struggle. It is not, so it comprises of various battles that have to be fought, using various strategies and tactics. And the use of a certain tactic over another does not necessarily equate to failure. And this is why from time to time we have to adjust our tactics in line with the strategies and objectives, for instance, as you would have read out. So, for instance, the lack of pursuing a legal route, for instance, does not necessarily mean that because we do not pursue a legal route, everything and nothing has been happening. As I've said, there are many victories worth billions of rands that we have advocated for, pushed for. So, and hence I'm saying it can't be only and limited to a certain route, for instance, a legal action. Hence I'm saying it is an idea that we are open to, and it is something, in fact, it is not the first time, in fact, we've had to consider a legal action, etc. So hence I'm saying it might be time for us to pursue such a route of legal recourse. You understand? So, but as I'm saying, there are many fronts to the struggle. It's not but one. There are many which we have to explore. And the terrain obviously has changed from time to time, and it differs from institutions to institution. So there's not one dogmatic way of approaching the struggle or the revolution, as it were. We have to use multiple fronts to fight and advance our interests, as we have been doing. For instance, this crisis of allowances, this specific one, is a crisis that is about 6 months old, and there are many things that we've been dealing with prior to that, even this one. And we had hoped also that by now NSFAS would have been able to find some level of bring some level of order and stability to this payment system. So the point that I'm making is that there are many avenues which we will explore. We are not opposed to a legal route. We will explore it, and the absence of the legal route is not necessarily the absence of advancing the interests of students. As we have said, there are clear I think wins which we have been able to garner for the students that are undisputable.
So let's talk about 2024 and some of the recommendations that you've made to NSFAS and how you think they can deal with these issues as the first part of the question. And the second part speaks to what communication or dialogue has existed or is in existence between yourselves and NSFAS, particularly prior to the launch of this new system. Were you engaged? Were you appraised of the possibility that there would be some shortcomings, some teething problems in this new system?
All right. So let me firstly speak to some of our recommendations that we believe should inform the 2024 academic year. The first one is allowances. We have said that allowances must be increased to 2,000 based on what we understand to be the needs and the demands on students and what we believe to be insufficiency in those allowances. That's part one. Number two, that we have asked for the 350,000 household threshold income to be increased to 600,000. We will release a statement, for instance, tomorrow regarding progress on that, which will assist us to deal, for instance, with the issue of the missing middle. We have asked that there must be a provision to deal directly with the funding request of the missing middle, which, as I've said, we'll speak to that in a statement tomorrow. In terms of, for instance, some of the things, there are many things, but we've also, for instance, spoke on the progression rule and the N+ rule, as saying that we believe that must be increased to N+2. One of the reasons why we advance that argument is we are saying that often institutions of higher learning give you N+2. Therefore, your funding must also be N+2, because if the institution still deems you qualified to carry on with your studies and finish within what they prescribe to be the prescribed time, we do not believe that the state should fund you for less than that. It must match up to that. So those are some of the things. We have, for instance, said that in the next funding cycle for 2024, there must be provision for postgraduate funding specifically for NSFAS students that are in professional careers. Now here we're speaking about engineering, we're speaking with psychology, because for instance, currently now, NSFAS will only fund you for your first degree, and you do not have funding for your postgraduate. And some of the professional qualifications, you can't qualify up until you obtain, for example, NQF level 8 or 9. So those are some of the things, for instance, that we have spoken to. But if the public wants to access those, because of time, I might not go through all of them. They are available on our social media pages. As to are we in communication with NSFAS and the department, we are on a continuous basis, and this is why we appreciate these weaknesses that I have presented, for instance, here. We carry on to engage with them. Unfortunately, irrespective, for instance, I've said, no matter how useless the acting CEO can be, we still have to meet with the man and his team, as incompetent as they might be, and carry on to agitate and advance. We still meet with the Department of Higher Education. We have a meeting with them, for instance, on the first week of January, to consolidate further the plans for the academic year of 2024. So there is that communication. Has it borne results? Relatively, not to the extent to which we believe it would be effective in having a sector that is run efficiently. There are many things, we'll probably have that on another show, many things which we believe are structural and institutionalized that we believe are hindering the sector to be able to be coordinated, and we believe once those structural and strategic issues are dealt with, some of these issues which we are speaking about here, me and you, would completely subside. So those are some of the conversations we're having at an operational and at a strategic level.
Asive Dlanjwa, the president of the South African Union of Students, speaking of allegations of incompetence at NSFAS, says that many students have failed to receive their allowances and some are struggling to get home